I have to test. I make up questions at my computer and then I get on the floor and they don't work as well as I think they will, or they need a little tweaking, or I need a question before that to get people into it. Or I realized, like in the early days of apps, I was testing something about apps and I realized, when I got on the floor after talking to a few people, is I need to first ask, do you know what an app is? And now, of course, everybody does, but at the time, I would say at least a half really had not gotten into that. So yeah, I have to test, and I would say particularly what I try to engage practitioners in doing, because as much as I try to avoid this written questionnaire, I understand it's easier, but they are easier to administer than interviews, but they're the hardest to do well, and so you really have to test it. And the best way to develop a written survey is to have a series of conversations with people around the questions to find out how do they think about these things. What I might use a phrase, and we use a lot of in-speak, and we use a phrase that normal people will just look at you and go, it's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. So when I have conversations, I begin to understand how they think about it and what matters. So if I want to give people choices, I start to have conversations around these things and ask them questions about it, and then things emerge. So I then develop my choices for them to rank or choose or rate in some way. Yes, so prototyping or testing instruments is incredibly important. As we found out, testing an instrument over a year or two, it's not uncommon to get something really good then.
And what you're saying brings up in my mind, if we're talking to a bunch of, as disseminating this project, to professionals who are trying to develop an engaging intergenerational program, what we ran into is we couldn't just ask, were you engaged? Or was everybody in your family engaged? Because we had a very specific idea of what we meant. Mm-hmm. But again, it's like using that lingo. Mm-hmm. It makes sense to us, but it made no sense, or it made sense to the public, but they were like, oh, I did something where I watched, so I was engaged. Yeah, sure.
Right.
So I don't know if you have any...
Well, and that word engage, words get tired so quickly, and it goes back to that issue of what's the difference between learning and engagement. And I remember working with some museum professionals once, and I kept using the term, and she said, I'm sorry, all I can think of is the big engagement ring. And so after that I thought, well, okay, what does it mean? And when you look up the word, it's about being interested, involved, committed, all of those really good things. And so I think sometimes we have to give deeper thought to the language we use. And engaged is, for me, kind of in-speak. It's not, if you think about a visit, an experience you had when you were a kid, and if someone had asked you that question, sometimes I have to say, can I answer the question as a visitor? And I'm not sure I would say engaged. And even now, knowing what I know and doing what I do, when I take my grandkids out for a thing, I'm not thinking about how engaged are we. It's more holistic than that. So I think we have to find better language. And also if we give people, that's where talking with people, we start to know what are the different ways they are engaged. So if you go back to a lot of the frameworks we've worked on and other research, it's like, is that it was a rich sensory experience. So a lot of families will talk about, I like this because there were just lots of opportunities to learn through the senses, learning by doing. They use the term hands-on all the time. We might be tired of that term, but it's something they use. So you have to figure out how, and I wouldn't even use the term rich sensory experience with families, because that's geek speak for me. But it's like, that's where opportunities to learn by touching, by doing, by seeing, by hearing, by dancing, by moving, that kind of thing. A lot of the families will say, adults will say, well, I loved this experience because it inspired us, or it tapped into our creativity, and a lot of your things are about teamwork, like we learned to work together. And so for me, I have to get pretty specific in that language. that there was something for everybody, that everybody had a good time, that everybody felt like they were, that their interest and needs were accommodated in some way. So sometimes it's like, well, I'm having a great time if I just had a place to sit while the kids and the younger people were enjoying themselves, and I got a good vantage point to watch.
So we could ask what could make it better for you, or something like that.
That's a common question, and some people can answer it, but I think what you have to do is look at the answers you're getting. So if most of the answers you're getting are, nothing, you guys are perfect, you're great, and is it their job to tell me how to do my job better? I mean, I don't want to throw that baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I don't want to say never ask that question, but I would like to give them more specifics to respond to. Like, here's some things we're thinking about. What do you think about those? We're thinking about adding this and this, or we're thinking about doing this, or how do you feel about that? It's just when you're asked, especially if you're doing it on a survey, a written survey, I wouldn't ask a lot of open-ended questions, because I think about it, it's not the place to really think and write, especially if you're doing a paper survey right there and the kids are swarming around your knees and I've got to go, and I'm just not being very thoughtful. Sometimes if it's an online survey, if you can get them to open the link, then you can get them to do a little bit of thinking. But I like to try to make it as easy for them as I can.